Well, of course, Carolina Hurricanes prospects around the globe are doing well in many cases, and we want to stay up to date on what they're doing as usual. And joining me for the top prospects of the month for October, of course, is our insider, Nick Bass. Nick, welcome aboard.
Hi. Yep.
Hey, Nick, certainly interesting to see some of the folks that you've been talking about over the last few months. And of course, the Russian contingency continues to really take the light as far as these prospects are concerned. Several of the players you've been talking about from Russia, and I look forward to hearing more about them. And I think certainly at the top of the list, and you've talked a lot about him this year, is Nikita Artamonov. Now, Artamonov, of course, second round pick this year for the Hurricanes. We've talked a lot about that. Seemed to be a great opportunity for Carolina to get a guy that is a very young player, played in the KHL last year. Looks like he's off to a great start. What can you tell us about Nikita?
So I've mentioned it a lot in the past. He's just doing unbelievable things, and he's still on a historic pace. He's still on track to break the U20 scoring record, which obviously would be a very good deal for any player. But for Kane's prospect, it would be awesome. He's just generating chances consistently, using his IQ in ways that everybody wants to see him, and everybody kind of expected him to. It's been awesome to watch. He plays in about 10 minutes, probably something like that. So hopefully he starts to get back on track points-wise, because he's been held pointless in his past two, I think. But he's looked stellar, and even then, he's still doing incredible things.
Well, he had a great October. It looks like he had 5 goals, 4 assists for 9 points in 10 games. So definitely off to a great start. I think he's got 20 points already this year. So he's doing very, very well. And he's a player that, of course, we've talked a lot about Artamonov as being a guy that's a feisty player. He likes to get into the mix, very much on the puck, in where the dirty areas are. He's a guy that also has a lot of skills. So certainly reason to be excited about Nikita for sure. The next guy, we talk about him all the time. Folks are waiting anxiously to see him in the National Hockey League. And there was a discussion the other day. I think you might have seen the piece with Frank Cervelli and Daily Faceoff talking about the potential of this gentleman coming over to play for the Canes this year. Of course, we're talking about Alexander Nikishin. He's off to another great start, and he's number 2 on your list. What's going on with Alexander?
Yeah, he's doing what he's always done for the past 2 years at this point. He's not off to the same, historic pace that he's been on where, he's going to have a top 5 scoring season by a defenseman in KHL history. It's kind of been more mute. He's played very well. Even strength, he's still learning how to adapt to not having a partner that helps him out a lot defensively. He's still tracking back a lot more, which is definitely something that's new for him, especially as well. I've spoken about this extensively in stuff that I've written. I am not a big fan of how SK is running their power play currently. I understand I understand they brought in Tony DeAngelo for it. That's perfectly fine. At that point, you need to move Nikishin off the first unit and just move him to power play 2, because he was most successful running the point. Moving him out to the boards doesn't help anybody, and it's stagnated SK's power play to a just horrid point where it's actively hurting them. Okay. And, again, bringing in DeAngelo is perfectly fine. He's serving his purpose, and he's doing incredible things points-wise. Yeah. The issue is you're kind of hurting what Nikishin is doing going forward. But, again, Nikishin's been doing fine.
Well, he's, he had a solid October. As you mentioned, he's had 4 goals, 6 assists for 10 points in 10 games, I think. So he's a guy that, again, he's getting it done. He brings that size, he brings that toughness, and it is interesting. He's moved off that top power play point position. Of course, Tony DeAngelo is thriving in the KHL. That's kind of an interesting story in and of itself. Tony has 20 points in 16 games. He's got 3 goals, 17 assists, so he's off to a great start. In fact, that's second in team scoring on SKA. He's played probably 5 or so games less than anybody else. And he's also second in league scoring and defenseman. Same situation, probably 5 or 6 games less than the leader. So, I mean, quite a story for Tony. And here's an amazing thing. He's plus 16. So, I mean, he's doing something right down there in the KHL. He's certainly having a good time. I've heard some stories about him and Evgeny Kuznetsov getting along very, very well and so on. So he's definitely doing a big job for SKA, and that is affecting Nikishin. And that's kind of an interesting scenario. You have to think he's probably looking forward to heading over to North America at the end of this year and joining the Hurricanes. So, yeah, definitely playing very, very well as usual, but not as dominant, I don't think, as he's been certainly last year and the year before. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, the next guy we've talked a lot about, drafted again this season by the Hurricanes, and this is Justin Poirier. Poirier, you might recall that the comment on Justin Poirier was, hey, this guy can shoot the puck. And that was coming from Darren York at the draft situation. And we know he can score, and it looks like he's off to a great start.
Yeah, he's the sole reason I had to introduce a rule, because I know people would have gotten slightly upset seeing his point production, realizing why he wasn't, second or first. Justin Poirier is insane. He plays in a league that some might not value as highly just because it's a pure junior league at this. But again, he's doing things in that league that haven't been seen since probably like the 90s or the 80s in terms of goal scoring. His release is insane. He fights along the boards incredibly well for a player of his size, and his skating is really good, even if the stance itself is a little weird to watch. Having a 6 goal weekend, he had 8 points in total, but 6 goals in one weekend is obviously ridiculous. Having 4 goals in the game is obviously ridiculous. He's on a great pace right now, and I would not be entirely shocked to see him break his own record of 51 goals from last year. I think he's probably got more in him this year.
Well, again, he was a guy that we drafted him 156, and I think the general feeling by the Hurricanes was he fell a lot further down in the draft than expected, and again, that was due to size. Smaller player, but a guy that, he can score goals. And as you say, he's got that great release. He can really fire the puck, and he's definitely doing it. I think looks like in 11 games in October, he had 9 goals and 9 assists for 18 points. So those are pretty gaudy numbers for Justin Poirier. But again, a guy that looked good at the prospect showcase. I think he's a guy that definitely is in the plans for the Hurricanes in the future. Now, another guy that I like is Noel Fransen. You had him at number 4, playing in Hockey Allsvenskan over in Sweden. This guy, again, I think he's a guy that brings a lot of offensive capabilities. A very cerebral player. Liked what they said about him at the draft. I think that the comments that Darren York said were basically, hey, he doesn't get the recognition that he should. He's a heck of a player. And it looks like he's continuing that fine play. Tell us a little bit about Fransen and his play in October.
Yeah, he was really good. He's separating himself in terms of scoring by drafted players in the Hockey Allsvenskan. He's doing things that I didn't think was possible, mainly was because he's playing on their first pairing every night. He's getting over 20 minutes every night. He's doing pretty well in that, and this is the first time he's facing like kind of genuine competition, because the J20 is a little bit, weaker than Allsvenskan, which is just a step down. Fransen's looked really good. He's joined he joined the Sweden U20 team for their last tournament before the World Juniors. He didn't play today, though, which is a little weird, but I hope he makes the World Junior team, because he's had a very nice start to the season, but Fransen's had a nice little go of it.
Yeah, he's a guy, again, that he's a strong skater. He's a solid player. He's kind of cerebral on the ice. He's another player that, you look at some of these defense prospects and there's a consistency with them. And, Simon Forsmark's another guy that I like. So, you've got some players that are really interesting players. And for sure, again, they're going to challenge for positions with the Hurricanes in the future, I think, at some point. Now, a guy that has caught a lot of attention, just drafted this year, 133 actually for the Hurricanes, is Oscar Vuollet. Now, Oscar Vuollet, again, a player that seemed to fly under the radar. Couple of great years in junior, really strong player, smart player again. And again, he got off to a good start playing with, he's with, who's he with? Skeleftre. And
it's
yeah, if you can say it, you can do it. Yes, exactly. Skelefte. In any case, he got off to a good start, 3 goals, 4 assists in the month. So that's solid for him. He's a young guy, again, that's trying to cut his teeth in the major league over there. So tell us a little bit about this guy.
Yeah, he's really enjoyable. I think he takes personal disrespect whenever he's made the 13th forward and makes it his goal to do something outrageous. The first day of the month, I think, made the 13th forward and immediately scored a hat trick. So it's one of those things where he just ends up doing what he does. He's a very fun player. He is very adept on the perimeter, which is obviously something that you want from players that have the ability to shoot the puck like he does. One thing that I've noticed specifically this year is his willingness to go into the middle and into the slot, which was something that he didn't do a ton of in his draft year. Yeah. So if he keeps developing that, I would really appreciate it. He's also another Swedish guy that's on that U20 team, and he did play today. I don't want to say he's a shoo-in for the World Junior roster for Sweden, but I'd say he's probably as close as possible to that.
Well, the interesting thing about him, we've talked an awful lot about this as well, Nick, is he's got that hockey IQ. And one of the things that Darren York said about him at the draft was this guy is one smart player. So they like these guys that can get out and make things happen on the ice and see it well. And he's another guy that brings a lot of skill as a young player and was drafted very low, as I mentioned, at 133. So, I mean, that's they're getting young players at such incredible positions in the draft. It's really something to see for sure. So the top 5, we ended up with, of course, Nikita Artamonov at number 1. We had Alexander Nikishin at number 2, Justin Poirier at number 3, Noel Fransen at number 4, and Oscar Vuollet at number 5. So we had a couple of defensemen and then 3 forwards. That's a pretty good mix for the Hurricanes. Let's talk about some of the folks that didn't make the cut this month, but are in your players that you also wanted to mention as honorable mentions. A couple of guys that I wanted to talk about to kick it off. Of course, we watched a lot of college activity at the end of last year. We saw Lucas Mercuri, of course, doing very well with UMass. And he's a guy that we had talked about previously. He's a big player. He can skate. He kind of looks like an heir apparent to maybe a Jordan Staal type player. We really think he's got some capability, and he's getting a chance to show some offense. Jayden Perron, smaller player, so maybe the other end of the spectrum. We liked him a lot. Jayden Perron is a guy that, again, sees the ice extremely well. He's a great setup guy. He can also pot some goals here and there. He was a prolific scorer in junior. So, again, smaller player, but he's got some elite skills. And we'll round it out with Simon Forsmark, who I talked about just a short time ago. Forsmark, a big defenseman, checks in at 6'1", almost 200 pounds. And he's a guy that's getting a lot of raves these days. Let's talk about those 3 guys first on your honorable mentions.
Yeah, Lucas Mercuri he's a player that intrigues me from a standpoint of if his skating holds up, he probably has an NHL future somewhere. He is just big-bodied. He understands that he's big-bodied. He doesn't lose a lot of board battles. He's incredibly hard to box out when he's standing in front of the goalie. He's just a very interesting player. He's had a really nice start to the season for UMass. UMass has had a decent start to the season, so that's always good. He's primarily been their second and third line center, and he's looked good. And also, especially in the face-off circle, he's looked a lot better than I think people expect, or at least I expect him to be, because he kind of struggled with it last year. Jayden Perron is another undersized skill forward who's been awesome for UMass, not UMass, UND. And
yes, UND.
He's struggling a little bit defensively, but then again, he's on the line with Sasha Boisvert, who was drafted super high, and Dylan James, who I want to say was drafted top 3 rounds a few years ago by the Red Wings. So that line shouldn't really be asked to play defense that much. He's looked really good. His playmaking has been obviously where he makes a lot of his money, basically. He's an insane playmaker. His shot is good. He just doesn't use it a lot. And yeah, he's looked good. I liked it a lot. UND's kind of struggled, but one of his good games, which was a 2-assist performance, was against a very good Boston University team. So I still like a lot of what Perron is doing. And then Simon Forsmark, yeah, he plays big minutes for a very good team in Timrå in the SHL. He has a lot of success. He runs a power play. He does very good in that role. I like him a lot. I do wonder if he will ever step foot in North America, just because the Hurricanes' defense and their prospect pipeline continues to get more loaded, and it might just become a thing like that.
Well, I mean, when you think of Forsmark and Noel Fransen, I mean, those two guys are both outstanding deep prospects playing in Sweden. And I think, again, you're right. The Canes are loaded on the blue. I mean, so much so that Anthony Honka ended up heading to Switzerland this year. So they're definitely loaded up. But these guys are, from my viewpoint, very strong prospects. And both of them move the puck well, see the ice well, and definitely are solid defensive players as well. So lots to say there. Jayden Perron was expected to kind of pick up the gauntlet from Jackson Blake. I think a lot of folks felt like when Blake moved on to the Canes that Perron was going to get a chance to really take his game to the next level. Now, looks like in October he had 4 points. He had a goal and 3 assists in 5 games. He's not kind of there yet. So still waiting for him to catch fire and start to show what he showed in junior for sure. Lucas Mercuri is a guy that, again, he had a solid month. He had 2 goals, 3 assists for 5 points in 7 games. He's a guy that I really liked last year. I thought in the playoffs he looked really strong. He took his game to another level in the games that I saw in terms of, the Frozen Four, pre-Frozen Four games. He looked really strong, and I think he's a guy that, again, as you say, if he can get his skating going, he's going to be a player that can find a home in the Hurricane, or either with the Hurricanes or in the NHL somewhere as well. So, yeah, some really strong guys. Let's move on to the final 3. We've got Alexander Rykov. He seems to show up regularly. Rykov, of course, he's a guy that has elite offensive skill, but has just not been able to stay healthy enough to get to the next level. Hoping he can put it all together this year. And he's another guy that seems to go up and down the leagues. So you'll see him in the VHL, you'll see him in the KHL. He seems to get moved around quite a bit. So he's a guy we'll talk about. He had a pretty good month. He had 4 goals in 7 games, so that's good. But in the VHL again, and that would be similar to the American Hockey League, of course, in North America. And then a guy that I really am interested in is Roman Shokrin. Now, Roman Shokrin, he's a guy that, there were some really interesting things said about him at the draft. Now, we drafted him 184. And this guy is a big man. He comes in at 6'5", almost 200 pounds, but he can skate. And the other thing that they were talking about was that he's a very strong defensive player, but he's also starting to build some offensive acumen as well. And I think he's a guy that I'm very interested to hear what you're going to say about Roman Shokrin. And rounding it out is Igor Velmakin. And, of course, you had some fun with Velmakin at the Prospect Showcase, or the Canes Development Camp, rather. And he's a guy that looks like he's going to be a goalie as well. He's off to a pretty good start with Dynamo Minsk. What can you tell us about Rykov, Shokhrin, and Velmakin?
So, yeah, Rykov started his year at training camp with Tractor at the KHL level.
Right.
He got hurt. Don't really know what the injury was, but he was out of commission for a while. Started playing again at the MHL level, looked good, and got moved right back to the VHL level. Still looked really good. Got hurt again. He's finally starting to come back from injury now. He's primarily been on the third line for the most part, and he looks fine in that role. I really do hope he, keeps finding form and eventually does get moved back up to the KHL level, because he did look decent at the KHL level, doing what he was doing and translating what he was making successful in the VHL to the KHL. I don't know if that's going to happen because Tractor is a very good team. It just kind of depends on how he plays. Roman Shokrin is really fun. He's gigantic and he skates pretty well for his size, and his offensive game is really good, mainly because for a while they used him as a fourth line forward, and it was kind of cool to see that. But he's finally been moved back to defense, where he's primarily been a first pairing guy playing about 22, 23 minutes a night. And he's had very good success in that role, except for one game where he had 25 penalty minutes. Don't really know what that was about, but he's looked really good in that, and he's having a lot of success. He got moved up to Locomotive's Gold League MHL team, which is higher level competition than where he was before. Because the MHL, as I learned and still continue to learn, is a 2-division 4-conference thing. So there's a silver division, which is lower end competition, but still MHL. And then there is gold division, which is higher competition MHL. He got moved from silver to gold, and in the gold league, he's honestly looked better than what he did at the silver division, which is very good to see. So Igor Velmakin, I had a very long thing, and I'm going to continue to write about it in some stuff that I have coming up, because his stats, if you look at him, just overall, he has a close to a 930, I think, and like a 2.5 or a 2.3. And that's awesome. He's played very good against good competition. Against Locomotive, the number 1 team in the KHL, even if the top media people do not like the way they play hockey. He came in relief and had 16 saves, and he shut him out and did what he could to get Minsk back in that game. Against Severstal, who's another very decent team in the KHL, he had 39 saves and only lost in the shootout when he couldn't get goal support. He's a very solid goalie. I thought when Alexei Kolosov, when he left Minsk to come to the NHL, I thought Igor Velmakin was in line for a much bigger role. They then signed a starting goalie. That goalie gets hurt. I again went, okay, Velmakin's probably going to get a few more starts now. This is good. They sign another goalie. That guy's been basically their everyday starter, and Velmakin's gotten rotational work about once a week.
Right.
And for goalies, you need playing time to maintain consistent development. And unfortunately for Velmakin, he's just not. So their goalie that's starting over him now is still perfectly fine. Their starting goalie that they signed at the beginning of the year is finally back training with the team after getting hurt. And Kolosov still has a way to go back to the KHL if he does not believe there is a path to starting at the NHL level, which after watching the game yesterday, I don't think that's a surefire thing, especially on that game-winning goal, because it hit him in the glove and it just popped right back out. So unless there's a trade happening, I'm a little nervous about what Velmakin's going to do the rest of the year, because sending him to the Belarus League is really not going to help him out. Even though that game time is good, he's not going to be playing competition that helps him out. And he's having good success against good competition, which is probably the most annoying part about all of it.
Yeah. Well, you spent a fair bit of time with him. I know you got to know him a little bit at the development camp, and he's a guy that, again, fits that Russian goaltender kind of style. We've got several. I think there's probably 2 or 3 others we haven't even talked about. We have talked about Ruslan Khazheyev, who's in Chicago right now, I think, backing up Yana Peretz.
Hold on. Before we go further, backing up, the kid deserves to start before we even go further. He's looked I want him to start in the East Coast League, the East Coast Hockey League. He was, I will outright say, didn't look that great. He gave up 3 goals on 15 shots and got yanked. And but he goes to the AHL and has 2 games where I'm very impressed with how he plays. Yeah. He had a very decent game against Iowa, which was his first game, and it wasn't even that bad. Chicago just kind of struggled early on with transitions, and they never really got guys back, and they gave up a ton of transition chances, ton of odd man rushes, which was bad. In the game against Rockford, he just looked like a different goalie. I was insanely impressed to see what he was putting up, because he was scanning squared to shooters. He was getting active at the top of his crease. He was seeing through traffic with ease, and he should, because he's 6'4". But he just looked like a goalie that looked a lot more complete than his start in a lower level league. So personally, if Spencer Martin is staying with the NHL team, I'm making Khazheyev the starter and moving Perretz to a backup role. But he's looked awesome so far. I just want to get that
Well,
out.
it's interesting you mention that because we talked a lot about him before. I'm a big fan of his. I mean, he's a big goalie. He's extremely mobile in the net as well, and certainly watching some of the action we saw with him in the showcase games and so on, he was very strong. The thing about him, I think that the key thing is that he's got to play, and I think the other thing we sometimes forget with these players, he's come over from Russia, so this is a whole new deal for him. He's in a new country. I don't know if he speaks English at all. Usually these guys don't. He's got to find, he's got to find his way, and he's got to, that's not the easiest thing. And so I give them a little bit of slack in terms of finding their game, and certainly for a goaltender, boy, that's even more challenging as I see it. So I think, expecting him to come in and be a star off the get-go was not really reasonable. I think he's got the talent to do what's necessary. They just have to stay with him, give him lots of playing time. And I'd love to see him play more in the American League as well. He's definitely the prototypical Russian goaltender that we're seeing now. There's so many of them. We've talked about this before. That seems to be a factory. You look at Velmakin, you look at him. I think we've got some other guys, Naumov, and some other guys floating around as well. So lots of guys out there for sure. And speaking about the Wolves, well, I've got you here as well, Nick. What's your take on the Wolves so far this year? A bit of a slow start.
Yeah, my take was always going to be it's going to be a rough start to the season because one, they had a hard road trip immediately off rip where they had to go to Hershey, and Hershey's an insane AHL team. But my thing was the Hurricanes were not forced, but they kept a lot of their prospects and their AHL guys up until the last moment of NHL training camp because they physically had to meet requirements. Right. Yes. So they didn't play a preseason game. They had maybe about 3 days of practice before they had to play their first real AHL game.
Okay.
So I always thought it was going to be a very rough start to the season because they have a ton of young guys and a ton of new guys, new head coach on very little practice. Yes. So I was ecstatic to see them beat Hershey in one of the games. That was amazing because, again, Hershey's a great team, and Chicago showed they have talent to beat Hershey with very little, time to prepare. And then you go into another week where they've gotten more practice and they honestly look like, again, a competent hockey team. They just have to keep working on their goalies because obviously without Martin, who is very good in his starts, you're going to be leaning on two guys that don't have a ton of experience. So you have to be able to insulate them, and you have to let your young talent shine, which I'm not really worried about because Cam Abbott is very good in that regard. He's putting a lot of these young guys in positions to succeed. I've seen Bradley Nadeau kill penalties and do it consistently and do it at a high level, which is awesome because their Wolves penalty kill is good from what I've seen. So I think the Wolves are going to be fine. The slow start doesn't really necessarily do anything for me. If it continues for like another month, then maybe. But even then, they're such a young team that I'm not really too worried about it.
Well, I mean, I think certainly the ownership of the Wolves were a little bit concerned with that. The Canes sent down Tyson Jost, and they sent down Brendan Lemieux, and of course Joakim Ryan is down there, and I suspect maybe at some point Riley Stillman might get down there as well. But in any case, you're right about the goalies. Yana Pretz, I like a lot. He was outstanding in Quinnipiac, as we recall, in their championship. He's going to get a lot of playing time. They do have Dustin Tokarski. Interesting story. Dustin, of course, had a cup of coffee with the Charlotte Checkers some years ago, so they knew a little bit about him. He's had an outstanding American Hockey League career, so he's a guy that could come in and certainly help them and give them some veteran experience as well. So I think you're right. Any players that you've seen so far that you're excited about this year in terms of the Wolves? Who's sticking out in your mind?
Scott Morrow is leading the team in points, which is very cool. Ryan Suzuki is doing a lot of things you like to see from a player who probably should be in the NHL at this point. Bradley Nadeau is doing things that Bradley Nadeau likes to do, which is just shoot the puck at a very high rate and doing so at a very powerful number. Felix Sorum is having growing pains at center, which I fully expected. But again, he has to bulk up no matter what. Other than that, like defensively, he's been fine. He just has to bulk up. That's going to be the big thing. Obviously, Khazheyev, in my opinion, should be the starter. He's looked really nice so far in his appearances. Charles Alexis Legault is doing a lot of correct things. I'm seeing him throw his body weight around, which everybody knew he knows how to do. More importantly, I'm seeing him actively lead rush chances and transition chances more, which is something that I never saw at Quinnipiac, and I'm very happy to see this continue. Dominic Fensore is very fun to watch. Gleb. Okay. I guess since I mentioned his name, I gotta. So, he's been playing fourth line minutes, and if you're looking solely at plus minus in those fourth line minutes, it hasn't been good. I don't think it's attributed to him particular, but again, it's a young player coming over from Russia. He's obviously going to have some struggles. It's nothing like he's going to come over and immediately be a world beater. Those are going to be saved for the Michkovs, who played at the KHL level for a long time, for the Demidovs when he comes over, who's playing at the KHL level for a long time. It's going to be reserved for those guys. For him, he's been playing mainly at junior Russia, so obviously he's going to have struggles. The timing was super interesting of his KHL rights getting traded, and then he's getting healthy scratch for the Wolves, which is why I mentioned something which got some dude who paywalled KHL content you can get for free incredibly mad at me for some reason. I could not believe that on Saturday. I was like, that's insane. But in any case, it was just a very interesting timing of it all. Obviously, Gleb still traveled with the team, and he's still with the team now. Russian media has been very quiet on it. All they've said is that his rights were traded. They haven't given any indication if he's going back at all, so I wouldn't worry about it for now. The timing of it was just insane, though. That's all that was.
Do you think there's a possibility he could go to Bloomington or something and play in the ECHL for a while?
I don't think so, because at that point, if you give him the option of ECHL or going back to Russia, I think Chicago has some nice flights out at that point.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, he did have a great, opportunity at the showcase. He had a hat trick in one of the games. I thought he looked pretty good generally in the showcase, and he's a guy that brings elite offensive skill. The challenge he's facing again too with the Wolves is they have a lot of forward talent as well. So particularly with the veterans down there now, there's not a lot of positions for him to kind of move up into, and that's why he's been sitting on the fourth line. He's definitely not a fourth line type of guy, and they got to figure out how they can continue to keep him motivated and grow his game with limited playing time. That's going to be the key, because he's a guy to me that has tremendous potential. He's got natural offensive talent that you either have it or you don't. He's got it. So again, hopefully he can get his game back on track, and we'll see the Wolves start to put a winning streak together. Of course, the Hurricanes have been smoking hot, so maybe that will rough off on the Wolves as well. Anything else you'd like to say as we wrap up here today, Nick?
Yeah, Jackson Blake is awesome. I love the kid so much. He's very fun to watch. I hope he continues this point streak and he beats Michkov for the Calder.
Well, he definitely scored a gorgeous goal last night on a great setup from Jack Drury. He has offensive instincts. He's near the net. The one thing I've found with Jackson Blake that's impressed me the most is he really likes to go into the dirty areas. He has no concern at all with getting in where the action is, and that's for a young player and a rookie to do that is fantastic. And I think you're right. He's got a great future with the Hurricanes, and he certainly earned his role and his playing time. And I think one of the key moves was putting William Carrier on that line. I think that line has certainly been much stronger with William on the line, and I think they're going to be great. So, yeah, Jackson Blake, exciting, and we'll keep an eye on him for sure. In any case, Nick, as always, it's great to bring you on. We'll catch up again next month and talk about the Canes prospects around the globe and follow some of these folks over in Europe and in Russia and so on, and keep everybody up to date on how they're doing. For all of you that have been watching or listening today, of course, thanks so much for joining us. If you like this episode, please press the like button. If you have any comments, please leave those down below, and Nick and I will be happy to respond to them. And of course, if you want to be alerted of future episodes of stormTRacker, please subscribe and hit the bell button, and we'll make sure you're aware of when they are released. Again, as always, thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch up with you real soon, right here on stormTRacker.